Darkness. A muffled scream. A man thrashes in chains as a ring of iron spikes is slowly tightened around his head. Blood trickles down his temples. His eyes bulge with terror. In that agonizing moment, as metal teeth bite into his skull, he realizes this is how his story ends. But who is he? And what horror led to this brutal fate? To answer that, we must journey back to a quiet medieval town and the innocent child whose death unleashed a nightmare. It's spring of 1475 in the town of Trent, nestled in the Italian Alps. Families bustle about preparing for Easter. Among them is little Simon, a tow-headed toddler just 28 months old, full of life and laughter. But one evening, Simon disappears without a trace. His frantic parents search through the night, calling his name into the dark. Neighbors join the hunt by torchlight. No sign of Simon. Was it an accident? Did he wander off? Or something worse? Whispers spread quickly through Trent's narrow streets. At first, people fear the river's currents may have claimed the boy. But soon, a more sinister rumor takes hold, one that feeds on ancient prejudices. It was the Jews, some begin to murmur. They took the child for a ritual. A local friar's fiery sermons had recently filled townsfolk with wild tales of Jews needing Christian blood for Passover. Now, in the shock of Simon's disappearance, those tales ignite like dry kindling. Fear turns to accusation. Imagine the scene. Tense town elders pounding on the heavy doors of Trent's small Jewish quarter in the dead of night. There were only a few Jewish families in Trent, merchants, a physician, their children, longtime residents who lived peacefully among Christian neighbors. Now, those same neighbors shove their way inside, ransacking every corner of Jewish homes by order of the city podesta, magistrate. They find nothing, not a trace of Simon. Eventually, the search is called off, and hope dwindles. Then, on Easter Sunday, a discovery sends shockwaves through Trent. Simon's lifeless body is found in a water cellar beneath the house of Samuel, one of the Jewish leaders. The corpse is small and pale, still in his little clothes, but his skin bears strange marks, tiny cuts and punctures as if pricked by needles. The crowd gasps, some cross themselves. To the superstitious mind, it's proof of foul play. In a heartbeat, grief and fear morph into rage. Alarms bell from church towers. The town explodes with fury. Before Samuel or his kin can even plead their innocence, soldiers drag every Jewish man, woman, and child off to the dungeons. A cry goes up among the mob. Justice for Simon. But what follows is not justice. It is brutal vengeance fueled by hysteria. Deep in the bowels of Trent's stone tower prison, the accused Jews face unspeakable torments. Interrogators snarl questions laced with wild accusations. Why did you kill Simon? How many Christian children have you murdered before? Confess. When terrified denials are all they hear, the torturers resort to the tools of their grim trade. They tie one man's hands behind his back, attach a rope, and hoist him to the ceiling, a torture called the strappado. With a sudden release, his body plummets, jolting to a stop before his arms tear free, shoulders dislocate with a sickening pop. His screams echo off the dungeon walls. Instead of mercy, the interrogators sneer and raise him again and again, each drop shattering his resolve. Another victim, a father, a son, an old grandfather. It doesn't matter who. One by one, they are subjected to a nightmare of pain. Some are stretched on the rack until joints rip. Others have their feet held over burning coals until the skin blackens and peels. A young servant boy sobs that he knows nothing. In response, a gauntlet of leather and iron clamps down on his hand, filled with hot coals inside. The smell of charred flesh wafts through the chamber as he howls for his mother. The captors will accept only one answer, the one they've already decided. So they feed it to their victims in leading questions, in shouted accusations, in blows and blood. Eventually, broken and delirious, the prisoners begin to say anything to make the torture stop. They spin the story their torturers want, a lurid tale of how they supposedly murdered Simon in a dark ritual. It is all lies, wrung from agony, but it matches every hateful myth. And so the town of Trent, from the bishop to the beggars, comes to know it as the truth. Outside the dungeon, this truth fans the populace into a frenzy. When the show trials conclude, execution day arrives with grim pomp. The city square is packed shoulder to shoulder, faces eager for vengeance. The condemned, 15 Jewish men in total, are paraded out under armed guard. They are gaunt, bruised, some barely able to walk after weeks of torture. Among them is Moses, the community's elderly teacher, 80 years old and utterly frail. He has endured torment that would break a young man, yet until his final day he maintained their innocence, until his torturers shattered his bones so cruelly that he whispered a false confession with his last strength. Now Moses and the others are about to pay with their lives for a murder they did not commit. The crowd watches in pitiless silence as the first group of prisoners, those who refused conversion, are led to stakes piled high with wood. Flames are lit, screams pierce the air as fire curls around flesh. The mob doesn't flinch. To them, these dying men are child killers, monsters in human form. Next, the remaining are given a swifter death. A sword flashes in the morning sun, and several heads are severed in one brutal sweep. Heads that once bowed in prayer now roll on the blood-soaked cobblestones. By the time the sun sets on Trent, nearly the entire Jewish community, fathers, sons, pillars of the town, have been exterminated or dragged off in chains. Only a handful of women and children survive, spared for the moment but locked away, their fate uncertain. In the aftermath, little Simon is hailed a martyr. The church bells that tolled for his funeral now ring out in triumph. Bishop Johannes Hinderbach, the ruler of Trent, leads a somber procession as Simon's tiny body is laid in state. Miracles are soon reported at the boy's tomb. The townsfolk light candles in front of Simon's image, praying to him as a holy intercessor. In their minds, the evildoers have been punished and God's justice served. But beneath this pious fervor lies a dark secret, one that will soon begin to unravel. Amid the town's feverish scapegoating, one man in particular had been fanning the flames. He's known as Johannes, the Swiss, a neighbor of the Jews and a longtime troublemaker. Early in the chaos, Johannes was the loudest voice, shouting that the Jews did it. It was he who first insisted the magistrate search Samuel's house. He hungered to see his hated neighbors fall, and fall they did. But Johannes's triumph will be short-lived. As weeks pass, word of Trent's blood-soaked justice travels beyond the Alps, reaching the ears of Pope Sixtus IV in Rome. The Pope is alarmed, not only at a child's murder but at the sadistic purge that followed. This cannot be the whole story, he suspects. Eager to prevent more massacres sparked by this incident, Sixtus sends a special envoy, Bishop Battista de Giudici, to investigate Simon's death with fresh eyes. When Bishop Giudici arrives in Trent under the Vatican's orders, he is met with a wall of hostility. The locals are enthralled by their martyr and resent any challenge to their narrative. Bishop Hinderbach, the very architect of the trials, pointedly refuses cooperation. In secret, Hinderbach even warns the townsfolk this outsider might free the prisoners and ruin Simon's cult. Tensions simmer as the papal investigator realizes he must tread carefully. Nevertheless, he persists. Giudici quietly gathers hints that things were not as they seemed. He notices the Jews in custody who hadn't been executed are languishing without cause. He hears whispers that some Christians had grudges against the Jewish families, perhaps motives to frame them. One name comes up repeatedly in hushed conversations: Johannes, the Swiss neighbor. Rumor has it Johannes despised Samuel, the Jewish elder, and might have planted Simon's corpse near Samuel's house out of revenge. It's a shocking idea that the accuser could be the real culprit. Giudice needs proof. Under cover of darkness, the papal envoy manages to have one surviving Jewish prisoner smuggled a message: "Tell me everything. I will listen." What he learns confirms his worst suspicions. The confessions were forced, and at least one Jew recalls hearing a servant mention seeing Johannes lurking near Samuel's cellar that fateful Easter. Armed with this lead, Giudice moves swiftly. He has the authorities, those few not entirely under Hinderbach's thumb, arrest Johannes and one of his known associates, a tailor named Anselmo who was also implicated by the Jewish testimonies. Now the tables turn. The same dungeon that echoed with the cries of innocent Jews now holds Trent's original accusers. It's cold and lightless in the cell where Johannes the Swiss finds himself chained. One can only imagine his thoughts as Bishop Giudice's interrogators step forward with their instruments. Perhaps Johannes tries to protest, to invoke his standing as a Christian and a loyal son of Trent. But mercy is a luxury he never afforded his victims, and now none is given to him. First comes the strappado rope, dislocating Johannes's shoulders with a howl. Next, hot irons hover threateningly near his flesh. The investigators demand the truth about Simon's murder. At first, Johannes spits out defiance. He's innocent, he swears. But his accomplice Anselmo in the next cell has already broken under torture. In a desperate bid to save himself, Anselmo accused Johannes, painting him as the mastermind who killed Simon and planted the body to frame the Jews. Confronted with his comrade's testimony, Johannes' bravado falters. That's when the torturers bring out a device as diabolical as any used in those days: the iron crown of spikes. It is a broad iron band, dark with rust, and along its inner side glint dozens of sharp metal spikes. They fit it around Johannes' head, circling his brow like a ghastly parody of a king's crown. With each turn of a screw, the band contracts, and the spikes press into skin, then flesh. Johannes thrashes in agony. Panic surges as warm blood trickles in rivulets down his face. The pain is excruciating, like 100 needles driving into his skull all at once. Through his screams, the questions pound at him. Did you murder the boy? Did you hide Simon's body? Every crank of the iron crown sends new shocks of pain through his brain. The spikes bite past flesh, scratching bone. His vision swims red. At last, something shatters inside Johannes. Call it courage or simply the last vestige of strength. With a strangled sob, he confesses, Yes, he played a role in Simon's death. Gasping and weeping, Johannes babbles out a tale: how he hated Samuel the moneylender, how he saw an opportunity when the child went missing. Maybe he didn't act alone. He implicates Anselmo and perhaps others, but crucially, he admits to the monstrous deed. It is a moment of horrid irony. The man who lit the torch of Trent's frenzy now finds himself consumed by its flames. In that dungeon, Johannes finally feels the same terror he once helped inflict. As the inquisitors tighten the spiked crown one notch more, his pleas fall to whimpers. His scalp is a mass of blood. Skull bone begins to crack with a hideous crunch. For all the cruelty he showed others, this is how he meets his end. Not as a righteous avenger, but as a blood-stained culprit, utterly broken. No crowds gather for Johannes the Swiss. No bells toll in mourning when, after one final turn of the screw, the spikes pierce into his brain and his screams fall silent. In the stillness after, even the hardened torturers step back, grim-faced. Justice, or something like it, has been served. The iron crown of spikes lives up to its horrific purpose, claiming one more life. Bishop Giudici records the confession. His report to the Pope will state that Simon was likely killed by Christian conspirators to frame the Jews, and that a terrible miscarriage of justice occurred in Trent. He urges that the remaining Jewish prisoners be freed at once. Shocked and chastened, Pope Sixtus IV orders an end to the persecutions. In time, the surviving Jewish women and children of Trent are released from their cells, though their husbands and fathers are long dead and cannot be returned to them. The saga of Simon of Trent does not end neatly or happily. Innocents died, and for a time a lie triumphed. Johannes Hinderbach, Trent's bishop, stubbornly continued to proclaim Simon a holy martyr and refused to admit wrongdoing. The town even built a shrine honoring the child, and for centuries Simon of Trent was venerated by the ignorant as a saint. But truth has a way of rising, and the truth of this dark episode eventually came to light. The iron crown of spikes, that cruel instrument, serves as a stark symbol of what blind hatred and fear can lead to. It reminds us that the same violence once unleashed on a scapegoat can turn back on the instigator. In Trent, prejudice turned ordinary neighbors into executioners, and in the end, even one of those neighbors paid with his blood. The tortured death of Simon's accuser is a grim mirror reflecting the town's own savagery. Why does this story matter today? Because it is a cautionary tale of how fear and bigotry can warp a community, how innocent lives can be destroyed by a lie, and how justice, if it comes at all, comes at a terrible cost. It challenges us to remember Simon's fate and Johannes's demise whenever we see scapegoating and hysteria rear their heads in our own time. In that awareness lies the hope that such horrors never repeat.